They say the Namibian desert is silent. That's a lie. Out here, silence is just a predator holding its breath. It's a place where the sun doesn't rise. It bleeds into the sky. A place where survival is calculated in seconds, and mercy. Mercy is a currency that nobody spends. Caleb Brooks knew the rules better than anyone. As a wildlife filmmaker, he was a ghost behind the lens. His job was simple: watch, record, never interfere. He had built a career and a wall around his conscience on one cold, hard truth. Nature takes its course. But on a freezing morning, at the edge of a sinkhole, where the earth simply vanishes into darkness, Caleb saw something that broke the logic of the wild. A single lion cub, cornered, alone, and 6 hyenas closing in. Sometimes you watch history happen, and sometimes you slam on the brakes and rewrite it. This is the story of a man who crossed the line and the war he started with the desert itself.
You are listening to The Burned Corridor.
The first light over the Namibian desert didn't rise so much as seep in, a pale wash of silver along the jagged horizon. Wind moved low across the sand, whispering through wiry grass and over scattered stones. For a brief moment, the land felt still, like it was holding its breath between night and day. At the edge of a vast sinkhole, where the earth simply vanished into shadow, that breathless pause was already broken. Perched on a crumbling lip of dirt was a lion cub, barely old enough to steady its own steps. Its paws were too big for its body, its fur still soft and fuzzy along the belly, a baby fuzz that didn't belong in a place like this. The cub's sides rose and fell too fast, each breath a ragged gasp that puffed steam in the cold dawn. It peered over the edge once, saw only darkness below, and jerked back with a strangled little squeak. Around it, 6 hyenas moved like a tightening storm. Their mottled coats blended with the dust, gray and brown and sun-faded tan, just shapes slipping in and out of the early light. Their eyes, though, were bright and sharp, following every trembling step the cub took. Their laughter hadn't started yet. What came instead was a series of low, ugly chuckles, the sound of patience wearing thin. One hyena was larger than the rest, her belly swollen, sides rubbed bald from rubbing against rock and thorn. She walked with a slow, rolling gait, a predator weighed down by more than hunger. One of her ears was torn clean through, one eye had clouded to a pale, milky blue. She stared at the cub the way a starving woman might stare at a loaf of bread. To her, this wasn't cruelty. It was survival. The cub called out again, a tiny, cracking sound that tried to be a roar and came out as a plea. Yesterday, that sound would have brought a shadow moving through the grass, a rumbling chest, a familiar scent of milk and dust and warmth. Now the sound bounced off empty rock and open sky, swallowed by the sighs of the desert. No answering roar drifted back, only the soft scrape of paws on loose gravel. It took a step backward, then another, its hind legs shaking so hard they almost buckled. The ground at the edge of the sinkhole crumbled where it pressed its weight, little stones skittering down into the darkness. The cub flinched at each tumble, as if the falling rocks were bits of its courage dropping away. Behind it, the drop was absolute. In front, 6 bodies waited, jaws parting, breath hot and sour in the cold air. Above them, a pair of vultures rode the warming currents, barely moving their wings. They circled once, twice, then settled into a wide, patient spiral. They weren't in a rush. Whether the cub fell or was dragged down, they would eat. A jackal stood on a far ridge, thin and watchful, weighing the distance between what he wanted and what he'd survive. The desert was full of witnesses that would do nothing. The pregnant hyena took a step closer, claws biting into the hardpan. Her ruined eye never left the cub, but the good one swept the horizon, checking for big shapes, for the ripple of grass that meant lions, for the glint of metal that meant gunfire. She smelled only dust, faint smoke, and the sweet, sharp scent of young blood. Satisfied, she let out a short, humorless bark. The circle tightened in unison, as if on command. One of the younger males, restless and reckless, broke formation too soon. He darted in, snapping his jaws just inches from the cub's face, teeth clacking as his jaws shut on empty air. The cub screamed, stumbling backward so fast its back paws skidded. Dirt gave way under its weight with a dry, tearing sound. For a heartbeat, its whole body tilted toward the void, front paws clawing at nothing. The one-eyed hyena surged forward, not to kill, but to shepherd. Her shoulder slammed into the younger male, knocking him aside with a snarl that carried more warning than anger. She'd been around long enough to know how this worked. A terrified animal ran in straight lines, and straight lines were easy to predict. She wanted the cub right where she could control how it fell, close, but not gone. The cub froze, little body quivering, claws digging into the crumbling ground as if it could pin the desert in place. Its mind, still too young to understand death, reached for shapes it knew. The curve of a mother's chest, the brush of a rough tongue over its ears, the safe wall of warm fur against a cold night. None of those things existed here. The only warmth came from the breath of the hyenas. The only walls were teeth. For a moment, the desert around them seemed unnaturally still. The wind died down, leaving only the soft hiss of sand settling and the faint scrape of paws against stone. Even the vultures paused their circling, wings held wide as if listening. The cub's chest hitched. A thin string of drool hung from one corner of its mouth, trembling with each rapid exhale. Then, far off, something changed. At first it was nothing more than a tremor in the air, a low vibration that brushed the edge of hearing. The hyenas heard it before the cub did. Their ears twitched, bodies angling just slightly toward the eastern horizon. The sound grew almost too low to be called noise, more like a growl buried inside the bones of the earth. The vultures shifted uneasily, wings tipping off balance for a breath. The one-eyed hyena snarled, annoyed at the distraction. She glanced over her shoulder, lips peeling back from her teeth in a soundless challenge to whatever dared interrupt her easy meal. The cub lifted its head, eyes wet and wide, following her gaze. In the distance, beyond a shimmer of rising heat, something caught the first true light of morning and flashed. For all its fear, the cub felt something else slide in alongside the terror. A flicker of confusion, a pinprick of hope it didn't have words for. The sound in the distance grew a little louder, a little sharper, threading through the hyena's low chuckles like a warning from a different world. The desert, which had been so certain a moment before, suddenly felt less sure of itself. At the very edge of the sinkhole, the lion cub's paws slipped again, sending a fresh spray of gravel whispering into the dark. The one-eyed hyena stepped forward, ready to claim what the desert seemed determined to take. But for the first time since dawn began, not every eye around that circle was fixed on the helpless cub. Some were turning, hesitant and wary, toward the strange rumble rolling in from afar. The morning sky stretched open in soft bands of rose and gold as Caleb Brooks guided his gyrocopter across the desert. He flew low, scanning for antelope herds he needed on film, letting the hum of the engine steady his breath. Filming wildlife had always been his escape. Clean air, open space, no noise he didn't choose. Out here, the world felt simple again, almost peaceful. He adjusted his camera rig, following a line of tracks weaving toward a rise of sandstone. His headset crackled with Dr. Lena's voice from the base camp, her tone calm as always. She reminded him of increased poaching activity near the fire corridor and told him to stay alert. Caleb nodded instinctively, though he rarely worried while flying. Trouble didn't usually touch the sky. When he swept the lens across the sinkhole field, a flicker of movement pulled his focus. At first he thought it was wind kicking dust along the rim, but then the shapes sharpened. Hyenas. Too many. Moving too close together, too intently. He lowered the camera a fraction more and froze when the tiny form at the center came into view. A lion cub, cornered, trembling at the edge of the void. Caleb cursed under his breath, his chest tightening before he even understood why. He'd filmed scenes like this before, hunters and hunted, nature's brutal balance, but this felt wrong. The cub was too young, too small, fighting a fight it didn't even understand. For a moment, he kept filming out of habit, but the lens shook faintly in his hands. Something wasn't sitting right in his soul. "Kaito, you on?" Caleb murmured into the mic. A beat later, the tracker's low voice answered, steady and grounded like the desert sand. Kaito asked for coordinates. Caleb hesitated, unsure whether he wanted to disrupt the rule he'd lived by. You don't interfere with the wild. But the sound of the cub's cry, thin, desperate, carried faintly through the headset, cut through every excuse he tried to build. Kaito didn't offer comfort. He spoke with a simple firmness that felt like truth. If you watch that little one die, he said, you're no different than the men who set the fires. The words landed like a stone in Caleb's gut. He wasn't cruel, he wasn't careless, but he knew Kaito wasn't wrong. Some moments didn't care about rules. Some moments demanded you show up. Caleb angled the gyrocopter toward a stretch of flat sand, suitable for landing. The machine jolted when it hit the ground, metal skidding slightly before settling. He didn't wait for the engine to cool. He sprinted toward the pickup parked at the ridge, heart hammering as if trying to outrun the scene he'd witnessed from above. The morning air tasted sharper now, edged with urgency. June's drone feed popped onto the console the moment he started the truck. Her voice, bright and quick, filled the cabin. She confirmed she also saw the hyenas and the cub. She warned movement around the perimeter suggested agitation. Like the predators sensed something else approaching. Caleb gripped the wheel, instinct pulling him faster down the slope. As he sped forward, the rumble of the engine merged with the distant growl rising from the plains. Dust peeled away from the tires, spiraling behind him like smoke. A part of him still whispered that he shouldn't be doing this, that the wild had its laws, and he had no right to rewrite them. But another part, The older part, the part he tried not to remember, pushed him onward with steady force. In his memory flashed a younger Caleb, standing helpless beside a trapped elk years ago, filming instead of acting, haunted afterward by the sound of its final cry. He'd sworn he wouldn't repeat that mistake, yet he had buried that promise somewhere under miles of desert and a career built on watching instead of intervening, until now. The sinkhole came into view again as he approached, the rim jagged and pale against the shifting sand. The hyenas tightened their formation around the cub, their attention torn between hunger and the rising growl of Caleb's engine. The cub's tiny silhouette quivered on the brink, its paws dangerously close to giving way. Caleb slammed the brakes, dust exploding around the truck like a warning flare. For one beat, he stayed inside the cab, breath held, palms pressed to the wheel. The scene outside looked even worse from ground level, closer, sharper, crueler. The cub let out another fragile cry, and that was enough. Caleb threw the door open, stepping onto the sand as though the world had narrowed to a single point of purpose. Behind him, the engine idled with a low, trembling growl. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a ranger. He wasn't even sure he knew what he was doing. But as he took his first step toward the sinkhole, toward the trembling cub and the circling predators, one truth settled in his chest with quiet certainty. Doing nothing was no longer an option. Not today. Not for this life hanging by a thread at the edge of the world. The pickup crawled the last stretch toward the sinkhole, its headlights cutting pale tunnels through the drifting dust. Caleb eased off the gas, letting the engine's growl soften so he could listen. The hyena's low chatter seeped through the open window, ugly and eager, like they were already tasting victory. He could feel the vibration of their hunger in his ribs. Kaito sat beside him, eyes narrowed, hands resting, loose but ready on his knees. He'd ridden in silence most of the way, the kind of silence that said more than any lecture could. Now he leaned forward, peering through the windshield as the rim came into full view. "They're close," he murmured. "Too close. You'll have seconds, not minutes." Caleb swallowed, throat suddenly dry. From here, he could finally see the cub again. Nothing but a small, shaking shape pressed against the edge where the desert just stopped. The hyenas had tightened their half-circle, leaving just enough room for the cub to back itself into oblivion. Dust clung to its fur, turning gold into ghost-pale tan. It looked even smaller than it had from the sky. He flipped on the high beams and tapped the horn twice. The blare shattered the thin morning quiet, bouncing off rock and empty air. Hyenas flinched, squinting into the sudden light, but none of them ran. Instead, heads turned, teeth bared, calculating this new intrusion. One even stepped closer to the truck, testing for fear. "Use the speaker," Kaito said, nodding toward the control panel. "The lion roars." They had recorded big cats months earlier to lure animals on camera. Caleb hesitated only a heartbeat, then hit the switch. A deep, rolling roar thundered out over the sinkhole, the sound of a full-grown male claiming space. Sand shivered. Vultures lifted higher into the air. For a moment, the bluff worked. The younger hyenas shrank back, ears pinned, eyes searching for a body to match that voice. But the one-eyed female held her ground, hackles only slightly raised. She sniffed, tasting the air, and understood what the others didn't. This was a trick. Flesh and blood lions smelled like dust and musk and old blood. This roar smelled like metal and plastic and man. Caleb felt the shift the same time Kaito did. "She knows," Kaito muttered. "You won't scare her off from in here." The words weren't spoken as a challenge, just a simple truth laid on the table. Caleb looked at the cub, at the way its paws slid another inch toward the break. The desert around them blurred the edges. All his focus narrowed to that one fragile life. He killed the recorded roar and cut the horn. The sudden quiet rang in his ears. "Stay with the truck," he said, though he already knew Kaito wouldn't. He opened the door, hot air rushing in, and stepped down into the sand. The ground felt uncertain beneath his boots, softer than it looked, like it could give way under the wrong pressure. The smell of animal and smoke and fear hit him all at once. The hyenas turned to face him fully now, shoulders hunched, necks low. The one-eyed female let out a sharp, ugly laugh that wasn't amused at all. Caleb raised his hands, not in surrender, but to make himself look bigger, like the rangers had taught him years ago on a training he barely remembered. "Easy," he said softly, knowing they understood tone, not words. "Easy, girl." Behind him, the pickup's engine rumbled on idle. Kaito slipped out the passenger side, with a flare in one hand and a long wooden stick in the other, moving with a quiet confidence that came from years in this land. He didn't rush to catch up. He angled outward, creating a wedge of human presence that split the hyena line without touching it. Together, they formed a loose wall of their own. The cub stared at Caleb as he approached, eyes too wide for such a small face. It staggered when another pebble tumbled from under its paws, claws scraping desperately for purchase. The sinkhole below swallowed the falling stones with a soundless hunger. One more slip, Caleb thought, and that's it. No second chance, no slow fade, just gone. The one-eyed hyena lunged then, a sudden burst of motion aimed not at the cub, but at Caleb himself, testing the courage of this new intruder. Before her jaws could snap shut around possibility, Kaito's flare hissed to life, a blossom of red fire searing the morning air. He swung it in a low arc between her and the man, sparks spitting where they hit the sand. She recoiled, snarling, half-blind eye flaring white in the harsh light. In that stolen heartbeat, while the hyenas reset their courage and the desert held its breath, Caleb moved. He dropped to one knee near the edge, boots digging in, one hand braced on solid ground, the other reaching for a ball of trembling fur. The cub tried to back away in pure panic, hind paws skidding, the earth crumbling. For a split second, its front half tipped into empty air. Caleb lunged forward, fingers closing around loose skin at the scruff of its neck, the way a mother might carry her young. Its full weight jerked his arm downward, dragging him closer to the drop than he wanted to be. Sand slid under his knee, gravity tugged hard, and for a terrifying moment he wasn't entirely sure which way they were both going to fall. His heart slammed once, twice, like it could push him backward. Then Kaito's free hand clamped around the back of Caleb's jacket, hauling him away from the edge with a grunt. Together they stumbled back, a tangle of limbs and dust and shaking breath. The cub curled instinctively into Caleb's chest, claws sinking through fabric, tiny heart pounding against his ribs. He didn't even feel the sting. He was too busy feeling the weight of what almost wasn't. The hyenas regrouped at the edge of the new distance, pacing and whining, appetite thwarted but not extinguished. The one-eyed female stared hard, her good eye burning with a mixture of anger and reluctant respect. She could sense something had shifted for this little scrap of fur, that fate had tilted in a way she didn't control. After a long, tense moment, she turned with a rough snort and trotted back toward the scrub, her pack trailing reluctantly behind. Caleb backed toward the truck slowly, never turning his back, the cub still clinging to him like he was the last solid thing in the world. His legs felt weak, his breath coming in shallow pulls, but a deep, surprising calm slid in underneath the adrenaline. He had broken his rule. He had stepped across a line he'd drawn years ago, and yet, as the sinkhole shrank behind them, he knew, with a quiet certainty, he would do it again. The desert stretched quieter now as Caleb steered the pickup away from the sinkhole, the cub tucked safely in a blanket across his lap. Its small body trembled in steady, uneven shivers, each breath a reminder of how close it had come. Kaito rode with one hand braced on the dashboard, eyes scanning the open plain as if danger traveled in the wind itself. Neither man spoke. The desert didn't feel safe enough for words. When they reached a cluster of weathered boulders, Kaito signaled for Caleb to stop. He stepped out first, crouching low over the cracked earth. Faint smears of dried blood marked the sand, each one spaced like desperate footsteps. Caleb knelt beside him, the cub peeking from the folds of the blanket. The smell of smoke still lingered faintly, clinging to the tiny lion's fur like a ghost of where it had been. Kaito traced the tracks with slow, deliberate fingers. "She was hurt," he murmured, dragging the right hind leg, but moving fast, too fast for the cub to keep up. Caleb felt the cub's claws tighten in his shirt, as if it understood every word. The desert wind picked up, carrying the earthy scent of scorched grass from somewhere just beyond the ridge. It wasn't fresh, but it wasn't old either. They followed the path until the ground darkened beneath their boots. A long, charred corridor stretched out before them, a blackened wound carved through the golden landscape. Acacia trunks stood like skeletons, their branches curled and brittle. Caleb exhaled slowly, recognizing the pattern. "This wasn't wildfire," he said. "Someone burned a funnel, drove animals right into it." Kaito's silence confirmed it. June's voice buzzed through the radio, thin but steady. "My drone picked up something about 80 yards ahead. Movement near the rocks." Her tone shifted lower. "Not animal movement." Caleb exchanged a look with Kaito, the kind that said they weren't alone out here. Poachers used burned corridors like shortcuts, quick kills, easy trophies, no pursuit through smoke and heat. The cub let out a soft, pitiful cry as they stepped deeper into the corridor. Caleb pressed it gently against his chest, his heartbeat rising to meet its frantic rhythm. Ahead, the land still smoldered in places, ash rising in faint spirals where roots had burned underground. The trail of the lioness wove between fallen branches and patches of scorched earth, growing heavier with blood where her strength had faltered. A half-burned wildebeest carcass lay tangled in a wire snare, its hide blistered and torn. The sight made Caleb's jaw clench so hard it hurt. Kaito crouched beside it, inspecting the trap with a grim, practiced hand. "Same design as the ones near the border," he said. "Cheap steel, hidden before the fire. It meant someone planned this, not chaos, but strategy. The cub whimpered again, sniffing at the air, turning its head toward the rocks June had warned about. Caleb followed its gaze. The ridge ahead shimmered with heat, but something moved behind the distortion, just a flick, a shadow slipping from view. He felt the shift in his bones, an instinct honed long before he ever picked up a camera. Watching wasn't enough here. Something was watching back. They moved slower now, each step sinking into layers of ash that coated their boots like soot from an old fireplace. The corridor narrowed, forcing them to weave between charred trunks, still warm from the fire that had swept through days earlier. Caleb brushed a hand along one of the trees. Black dust clung to his skin, staining his fingers as if marking him part of this wounded land. Kaito lifted a fist, signaling them to freeze. Ahead, the lioness's tracks suddenly veered sharply, almost violently, toward a cluster of burned shrubs. Deep drag marks suggested she'd stumbled, maybe collapsed, maybe fought something bigger than the fire itself. Caleb felt the cub flinch as he stepped forward. The marks told a story neither man wanted to finish reading. At the base of a scorched ridge, clumps of golden fir clung to thorn branches, fresh, not yet dulled by dust. Mixed among them were darker strands, coarse and thick. Caleb recognized the texture instantly. "Male lion," he murmured, "rogue by the smell of it." The cub tucked its head under his arm, shaking so hard its breath rattled against his side. Whatever had happened here, it remembered. The air deepened into a heavy silence as they climbed the ridge. Each step brought the scent of blood stronger, mingled with the bitter tang of burnt foliage. Caleb felt the land tighten around them, as if holding its breath again, waiting. Somewhere beyond the ridge, beyond the smoke and heat shimmer, lay the truth of what tore the cub from its mother. And they were walking straight into it. At the top, Kaito steadied himself against a scorched boulder. "Careful," he whispered. "Her trail ends just past this rise." Caleb looked at the cub, then at the horizon bleeding into the darkened corridor. The desert below them felt too still, unnaturally so, and the silence pressed on his ears like a warning. He tightened his grip on the cub. Whatever they were about to find, it would change everything. They stepped over the ridge together, moving slowly as the burned land opened beneath them. The wind carried smoke and something heavier, older, a mix of fear and the fading echo of a fight. Caleb felt the cub's breath hitch as it lifted its head, nose twitching fast. Somewhere ahead, in the labyrinth of ash and shadows, lay the lioness, hurt, fighting, waiting, or already too far gone. Caleb exhaled, long and steady, bracing himself. They had entered the corridor searching for answers. Now, standing on the edge of its darkest truth, he understood they were also walking into something far bigger, far more dangerous than a simple rescue. And they were already in too deep to turn back. The burned ridge sloped downward into a clearing where the air felt heavier, warmer, as if the fire still breathed beneath the surface. Caleb stepped carefully, the cub tucked against his chest, its small heart racing fast enough to vibrate through his shirt. Ash drifted in slow spirals around them, settling like dark snow over the broken land. Kaito stopped abruptly, lifting a hand for silence. Beneath a collapsed, half-charred acacia trunk lay a shape he recognized instantly, a lioness, sides rising in shallow, ragged breaths. Her tawny coat was streaked with soot and blood, one hind leg twisted unnaturally. Yet when the cub whimpered, her eyes fluttered open, filled with pain and fierce recognition. The cub wriggled from Caleb's arms before he could stop it, stumbling across the ash to bury itself into her neck. The lioness shifted weakly, managing a faint rumble, little more than a whisper of comfort. Caleb lowered himself beside them, awe and heartbreak threading through his chest at the sight of maternal instinct fighting through agony. Kaito scanned the perimeter, muscles wound tight beneath his jacket. Her wounds are deep, too deep. Something big did this. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of blood farther than Caleb liked. Predators traveled on scents like these. He pressed a hand gently to the lioness's side, feeling the tremor of effort in every breath she drew. Then the cub suddenly froze, ears flattened, its tiny body pressed closer to its mother, trembling as the air around them changed. Caleb felt it too, a weight settling onto the clearing as if the land itself began to brace. He rose slowly, eyes narrowing toward the jagged shadows beyond the scorched trees. Something watched them from there. A low, rolling growl stretched across the clearing, deep enough to vibrate the ground beneath their feet. From behind a blackened rock, a massive lion stepped forward, mane coated in gray ash that made him look carved from the remnants of wildfire. His eyes burned amber through the soot. This was no wandering nomad. This was the predator that owned the corridor now. Kaito exhaled sharply. The Ash King. His voice carried both respect and dread. The rogue male took another step, shoulders rippling beneath the ash-matted mane. Caleb understood instantly. This was the one who attacked the lioness, the one who wanted the cub gone to force her back into breeding condition. Instinct drove him, not malice, but instinct could be just as deadly. A second growl rose from the opposite side. Caleb's stomach tightened as another male, younger but still powerful, emerged to flank the Ash King. The lioness attempted to push herself upright, but collapsed with a strangled roar, her body too broken to protect her young. The cub cried out, high and panicked, trying to wedge itself beneath her chest. Caleb positioned himself between the lions and the mother, feeling the raw, electric fear settle into his limbs. He had no flare, no rifle, no advantage except the thin belief that he might distract them long enough for something, anything, to change their minds. The Ash King lowered his head, testing the courage of the small human who dared stand before him. Behind them, the burned corridor whispered with movement. The one-eyed hyena from before slunk into view, followed by two others, drawn by the scent of a wounded lioness and the noise of gathering predators. Their laughter rose in jagged intervals as if delight flickered at the edges of this unfolding chaos. They knew what rogue lions left behind. Caleb's heartbeat thundered in his ears. The lions closed their distance one deliberate step at a time. The hyenas widened their arc. The lioness shuddered against the ground, unable to rise. Every path forward ended in blood. The cub pressed its face into her fur, squealing softly, like a question no one could answer. Caleb felt his breath catch, his vision narrowing. Kaito moved beside him with quiet resolve, gripping a long branch charred black at one end. "We hold them," he whispered, "long enough for fate to blink." But fate wasn't blinking. The Ash King's muscles tightened, a ripple signaling his intent. Caleb braced himself, every nerve stretched thin, when suddenly a deep vibration rolled through the earth like distant thunder. The ground trembled. Dust leapt from the surface. Even the hyenas paused. The Ash King's ears flicked back in confusion. Caleb turned toward the swelling rumble, and his eyes widened as the truth broke through the haze. Something enormous was charging toward them. Not a lion, not a hyena, not anything the predators expected. Its silhouette tore across the smoke. A black rhinoceros, wild-eyed and panicked from poachers nearby, burst into the clearing with the unstoppable force of a living battering ram. Caleb barely had time to pull the cub close as the beast barreled through the predators, scattering ash, earth, and chaos in its wake. The Ash King leapt aside, roaring in fury, his control of the land shattered in an instant. And in the seconds that followed, born of terror, chance, and the wild itself, everything in the burned corridor changed. The clearing still vibrated faintly from the rhino's charge as Caleb hurried the cub back toward the pickup. The little lion clung to him with trembling paws, its breath hot and uneven against his chest. Behind them, the Ash King roared into the rising dust, furious but unwilling to challenge the rhino again. The lioness lay too weak to move, hidden for now by smoke and chaos. Caleb knew staying there meant doom for all of them. With Kaito covering their retreat, he slipped the cub into the passenger seat, then turned the truck toward safer ground. The sun climbed higher, harsh light flickering over the blackened corridor, revealing every wound left behind by man and beast. The cub stared out the window, ears pinned with fear, searching for a mother it could no longer reach. June's voice returned over the radio, softer this time, as if she sensed the weight in the cab. She spotted a nearby pride, a stable group with 2 protective lionesses and a subadult male. "If they accept the cub," she said, "it has a chance." Caleb nodded, though doubt curled in his stomach. Accepting an outsider wasn't common, even for lions. Still, he had to try. The drive across the ridge felt longer than it should have. Each bump jostled the cub, drawing out faint cries that struck a fragile chord in Caleb's chest. He kept a steady hand on the wheel, but his thoughts drifted back to the lioness they'd left behind, fighting breath by breath, alone, except for Kaito standing guard. Guilt sat heavy beside him, a shadow he couldn't shake. When they finally reached the grassland, where June's drone had tracked the pride, the land felt startlingly alive compared to the burned corridor. The wind carried the scent of acacia blossoms, and tall grasses swayed in gentle waves. The cub's head lifted, nose twitching, as if some buried instinct recognized hope in the air. Caleb whispered quietly, "Maybe this is your place. Maybe." The pride appeared slowly, shapes emerging from the grass like golden ghosts. 2 lionesses watched from a distance, their eyes sharp and unreadable. The subadult male paced behind them, lanky but strong, mane just beginning to thicken. Caleb stepped out of the truck with deliberate calm, placing the cub gently at his feet. He backed away, hands open, heart pounding. The cub hesitated only a moment before taking a shaky step toward the lionesses. Its tiny tail quivered in the breeze, hope carrying it forward like a fragile thread. The lionesses held still, their muscles taut beneath sunlit coats. The cub let out a soft chirp, a sound meant to say, "I'm young, I'm harmless, I'm yours if you'll have me." For a single heartbeat, the world seemed to hover. Then the nearest lioness lunged, not to kill, but to warn. Her snarl cracked through the plains like a breaking branch. The cub skidded backward, stumbling over its own paws. The subadult male rushed forward, teeth bared, issuing a harsh, territorial roar that shook Caleb to his core. This wasn't curiosity. This was rejection, swift, absolute, instinctive. The cub's tiny body crumpled into the grass, shaking violently. Its eyes darted toward Caleb, wide with confusion, not understanding why every place it reached for pushed it away. Caleb stepped forward on reflex, but Kaito's distant warning echoed in his head. A rejected cub is a threat to them. Don't make it worse. He froze, helpless as the lionesses herded their young father back. One of the lionesses hissed again, sending a clear message. Leave. Now! Caleb lifted the cub gently, his hands trembling with a frustration he couldn't disguise. He backed away, without turning his back to the pride, feeling the weight of ancient rules he had no power to change. Some bonds could not be forced. Some families could not be borrowed. Back at the truck, the cub pressed its face into his ribs, sobbing in tiny broken yelps that didn't sound like any lion should. Caleb held it close, resting his chin against the top of its head. I'm sorry, he whispered, voice cracking around the words. The desert stretched around them in quiet sympathy, offering no answers, only space for grief. As he drove away from the plains, dust rising behind the truck like a fading trail of hope, Caleb felt the cubs trembling finally settle into exhausted stillness. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the land, shadows that felt like questions he didn't yet know how to answer. Where did this little life belong? With its mother broken? With a pride that wouldn't accept it? Or somewhere he hadn't yet imagined? The road ahead wound through golden grass and patches of scorched earth, a reminder of how fragile the line between safety and danger could be. Caleb tightened his grip on the wheel. If the wild refused to claim the cub, then he would keep searching. Somewhere out there, was a place this small heart could rest. But as the first stars began to appear, he couldn't shake the fear that the desert wasn't done testing them yet. The sun was sliding down the sky by the time Caleb turned the truck back toward the burned corridor. The light had gone soft and amber, smoothing the harsh edges of the land. The cub lay curled on the seat beside him, finally too exhausted to cry, its breaths shallow, little sides lifting and falling against a worn blanket. The road ahead felt both familiar and heavier now. Kaito sat with the radio handset pressed close, speaking quietly with Dr. Lena at base camp. Her voice crackled through, a steady anchor in the fading day. She and a field vet named Mbeki were already on their way in an old transport truck, carrying a dart rifle and a crate of supplies. Just keep her breathing, Lena said, and keep yourselves alive. We're 30 minutes out if the road behaves. June's drone fed a ghostly view of the corridor onto the small screen mounted on the dash. From above, the burned path looked like a black scar stitched across the sand. Heat still shimmered over it, but no fresh flames burned. She swung the camera slowly. I've got eyes on the acacia trunk, she reported. I don't see movement around her yet, but something's pacing the far edge. Might be him. Caleb tightened his grip on the wheel. The Ash King. Even saying the name in his head felt like inviting trouble. He pictured the lion's ash-coated mane. Those hard amber eyes fixed on the cub, like a problem that needed solving. He won't just walk away, Kaito murmured, echoing his thoughts. He remembers unfinished business. So do the hyenas. The pickup's tires crunched over the first patches of blackened soil, ash rising in small clouds around them. The cub stirred, lifting its head, nose twitching fast. It remembered this place too, the smell of burnt grass, of blood baked into dirt, of its mother fighting when she had nothing left to give. Caleb reached over and rested a hand lightly on its back. "Almost there, little one," he said softly. "Hold on." They killed the engine a few hundred yards from the fallen tree and advanced the rest of the way on foot. The silence felt thicker here, like smoke that never quite cleared. Every step sank into powdery ash that swallowed the sound of their boots. June's voice guided them through their earpieces, describing shapes the drone picked up: rock, trunk, faint heat signatures. The lioness was still there, half hidden beneath the charred trunk. Her breathing had grown shallower, but it was still there, stubborn and uneven. When the cub caught sight of her, it wriggled out of Caleb's arms, limping toward her with a choked little sound. Her eyes opened, heavy but aware, and she managed a rumbling exhale that sounded like relief dragged through pain. Caleb knelt beside her again, feeling the heat radiating from her wounds. Infection was already creeping in. He could see it in the angry swelling, the darkening flesh around the gashes. "Lena, she's worse," he said quietly into the radio. "You're going to have to move fast." Static crackled. Then Lena's reply came through. "We're pushing as hard as we can. Do not let anything finish what that male started." As if summoned by the words, a shadow shifted near the line of scorched bushes. The Ash King emerged once more, as if he had stepped straight out of the smoke. This time he was alone. No younger male at his side, no bravado needed. He moved with the slow certainty of a predator who believed the land belonged to him. His gaze slid over Caleb, then locked onto the cub tucked against its mother. The lioness tried to rise, but her body failed her again. She let out something halfway between a roar and a cough, baring her teeth, despite the tremor shaking her frame. The cub squealed and pressed underneath her chin, trying to disappear. Caleb rose to his feet, placing himself in that narrow space between the lion and the broken family he was trying to protect. His heart hammered, but his feet held. From the opposite side of the clearing, laughter drifted in, thin at first, then layered. The one-eyed hyena had returned, two more at her flank. They kept their distance from the Ash King, circling wide, biding their time. This was the way of the burned corridor now. Nothing attacked alone. Everything waited for someone else to make the first deadly mistake. Caleb lifted his hands again, making himself large, voice low and steady. "Easy," he murmured, more for his own sake than... "The lions!" The Ash King's ears flicked back. To him, Caleb was a strange, hairless animal that did not fit in any story he knew. Not prey, not rival, not carrion eater. A creature that came in loud machines and stood between lions and what they wanted. The lion took another step, testing Caleb's resolve. Their eyes locked, one filled with a cold, ancient purpose, the other with a stubborn defiance even he didn't fully understand. Kaito moved to Caleb's side, holding a length of the burned branch like a staff, ready to strike the ground, make noise, anything to buy a few more seconds. The cub whimpered behind them, a tiny drumbeat of fear. Over the radio, Lena's voice cut in, sharpened by urgency. "We're coming up on the ridge now. You might hear the truck. Do not run. Whatever you do, don't turn your back on him." As if on cue, a distant engine grumbled to life beyond the rise, its sound rolling down into the clearing like a low metal growl. The Ash King's head snapped toward it, confusion flashing in his eyes. For a brief fragile moment, the clearing held its breath. Hyenas paused mid-step. The lioness stared through half-lidded eyes. The cub trembled, pressed into the curve of her jaw, and there, standing alone between worlds, was Caleb, a creature no one out here had ever expected. Not the lions, not the hyenas, not even the land itself. A human who kept charging back into a place every instinct told him to leave. Headlights flickered at the top of the ridge, slicing through the gathering dark. Relief washed through Caleb so fast his knees almost buckled. He didn't know how they would trank the Ash King, treat the lioness, keep the cub alive through the night. He only knew this: they weren't alone anymore. The desert, with all its teeth and scars, was about to meet a different kind of animal, one that healed instead of killed. And for the first time since dawn, hope felt like something more than a cruel joke on the horizon. The headlights crested the ridge like twin moons, casting long, wavering beams across the ravaged clearing. Caleb exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding as Dr. Lena's old transport truck rattled into view. Dust rose behind it in a shimmering veil, glowing under the last streaks of sunset. Hope had finally arrived, wheezing and bouncing on bad shocks, but real. Lena climbed out first, her hair shoved under a sun-bleached cap, eyes scanning the scene with the calm precision of someone who had walked into chaos more times than she could count. Dr. Mbeki followed with a dart rifle already loaded, moving with quiet authority. "Show me the male," he said simply. Caleb pointed toward the Ash King, still tense, but momentarily distracted by the truck's rumble. The rogue lion hesitated, ears flicking back at the unfamiliar sound. Mbeki didn't wait for him to decide whether this new creature deserved to be challenged. He raised the rifle, breath steady, and fired. The dart struck the lion's shoulder with a soft thump. The Ash King roared, more insulted than injured, and spun in a tight circle. But his steps wavered after only a few strides. Within seconds, the great predator sagged to his knees, mane brushing the ash. Even sedated, he looked formidable, a fallen king resting on a battlefield painted in charcoal and dust. The one-eyed hyena chuffed nervously, then slunk back into the brush with her pack, unwilling to risk a fight with a foe that still radiated danger even in sleep. With the immediate threat gone, Lena turned her attention to the lioness. She knelt beside the injured mother, her face softening with a compassion too old and too practiced to be mere sentiment. "She's a fighter," Lena murmured, running gloved fingers along the torn flank. "But she's close to the edge." Caleb felt the cub press into his leg, trembling as Lena prepared the anesthetic. The lioness resisted the sedation at first, muscles flickering with stubborn life. She pushed her nose against her cub one last time before her eyes grew heavy. Caleb watched the moment her body eased into stillness, a fragile trust exchanged between wild instinct and human hands. Lena moved fast with Mbeki, stitching, cleaning, stabilizing. The desert faded into the background, holding its breath once more. As they worked, Caleb gently brushed the soot from the lioness's neck. His fingers paused when they traced a faint ridge beneath the fur, a scar shaped like a half-moon. He leaned closer and caught a glint under the grime, a microchip tag embedded years earlier. Lena's eyes widened. "This one? She was rescued once during the big dry season," she whispered. "We released her far from here." And that's when it hit him. Caleb remembered the day, foggy with heat, cameras humming, a younger him lifting a weak lioness from a dried riverbed. He hadn't known then if she'd survive. But she had. She'd lived long enough to raise a cub who now pressed into her side with the same fierce trust she'd once given strangers. Life had come full circle in a way he wasn't ready for. As night settled fully over the clearing, the moon rose, round, bright, and impossibly gentle. Its silver light stretched across the land, softening the burn scars and turning the ash to something almost beautiful. Caleb held the cub close as Lena finished the final stitch. "She'll make it," Lena said, tying off the suture. "Barely, but she will." A rustle carried across the plain. Kaito lifted his head first, sensing movement beyond the ridge. Figures appeared, 3 lionesses and a large male, their coats a healthy gold untouched by fire. They approached cautiously, drawn by the scent of blood, but guided by something deeper. The cub stiffened, then let out a tiny, questioning chirp. The lead lioness answered with a low, resonant hum. Recognition, not threat. She stepped forward, nose brushing the air near the sedated mother. Lena nodded slowly. "This is her pride," she whispered. "She made it back home." Caleb released the cub, watching as it limped toward the newcomers. This time, no one blocked its path. The lead lioness lowered her head and gently nudged the cub into the safety of her chest. Relief washed over Caleb so fully, it almost buckled his legs. The desert looked different now, less hostile, more forgiving. The stars brightened overhead, scattered like a promise across the sky. The cub nestled among its family, finally claimed by those who understood its language, its scent, its place in the unbroken circle of the wild. Caleb stepped back toward the truck, feeling the weight of the day settle into a quieter place inside him. He had broken every rule he lived by, and somehow, for the first time in years, that felt right. The burned corridor behind them no longer felt like a graveyard of failures, but a reminder that sometimes, even here, life chooses another chance. As the moon climbed higher, the pride gathered around their wounded queen, forming a silent ring of protection. Caleb stood at the edge of the clearing, hands on his hips, breathing in the cool night air. The desert had teeth, yes, but night, it also had mercy. And somewhere deep in his chest, a long-buried part of him stirred awake again. A second chance, not just for them, but for him too. If this story touched your heart even a little, I'd love to know you were here. Just drop a simple 1 in the comments, or a 0 if it made you emotional. It may seem small, but every tiny comment helps these stories reach more people who still believe in compassion, courage, and second chances. And if you'd like to join me for the next journey out on the Savannah, the next rescue, the next miracle, the next life-changing moment, make sure to subscribe and stay with this channel. There are many more unbelievable stories waiting for you, and I'd be honored to share them with you. I'll see you in the next chapter.
If this story touched you the way it touched us, let me know with the simplest comment possible. Just type 1 if you felt hope, or narrow if it left you speechless.